You do need to acquire new skills. You need to work ahead of the change in order to capture that opportunity. You have streaming platforms, right? And then these kind of streaming platforms are in some way, shape, or form at war for the eyeballs, right? Because at the end of the day, you can only be watching one at any given point in time. And so the way that they differentiate themselves is through content. Finding the right talent in the quantities, i.e. the numbers that you need them, is incredibly hard. If you're a startup, right? For you to be successful, especially if you're in a B2B model, you need to have success with the 80% of the economy, right? Which is the government or the family offices and the multinationals.
Hello, welcome to another The Change Officer Media podcast. I simply hate when I start podcasts like this, and I will tell you why. Just before the cameras turned on, we had amazing conversation in Serbian about so many interesting things. And now, coming to this podcast, I want just to keep it in English, just to keep it the same way as we discussed before the cameras turned on. They say that you have a small stress when the red light goes on, every time the red light goes on. But let's try to keep it cool as we were and as we are and as we were before the shooting. Ivan Jakovljevic, welcome to the Change Officer podcast.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. First time. We are saying this for the first time as Ivan, exactly, almost to the day, 2 years ago, was one of the first guests of the Change, as we called it that time, the podcast. Now is the Change Officer. And I'm very, very glad to have you again with us and with me here. And so many things changed. You see here the play of the words. So many things changed since we last spoke. So in 2 years, what can happen in the Middle East in 2 years?
Well, I don't know. It's not only about the Middle East, but we could potentially have a global pandemic that kind of changes the world completely, which has happened in the last 2 years. That pandemic can potentially change things up in terms of how people research, how people buy, how people behave, our relationships with people, with businesses, the way that we do work. Most of us work from home these days. Most of us have very different relationship with time and the business and everything. So it feels like, as you said, it's 2 years ago, almost to the date. But for all intents and purposes, it could almost be like 2 centuries ago.
Yeah, I like the Satya Nadella's statement that in the first 2 months of pandemic, we experienced 2 years in digital transformation of the companies. So everything's going around 2 and 2 and 2, and here are two of us talking about different things than last time. So last time when we met, you were what was the position? But in Google, very high ranked in Google.
Yes, I was heading up the new markets for Google. Essentially, I was a geographic lead of all the markets in the Middle East and North Africa, with the exception of the UAE.
Oh yeah. So first you were in UAE, and then expansion to new markets in Google, and then the change came. We didn't talk about that in the previous podcast, but today we can talk about the change that happened and how the change happens, going from such large corporate like the biggest in the world to a small partnership company that changes the world.
Absolutely. So I've left Google at the end of 2019. Took a couple of months off. Like in hindsight, I probably should have traveled the world. It seems like a missed opportunity these days since none of us are traveling much.
You went skiing, I remember.
I did go skiing. That's
Sochi,
right. That's right. Fun times. I joined basically the largest venture capital fund in the Middle East and North Africa region called STV, Saudi Technology Ventures. And my role there was essentially to take care of everything related to value creation and portfolio support. So if you think about the venture capital business, you can think of it as things that happen pre-investment and things that happen post-investment. Pre-investment, you are identifying sourcing deals, you are basically due diligencing, you are negotiating, and you're kind of signing on the dotted line. Once you sign on the dotted line, the real journey begins, because the portfolio company that you've invested in, you're probably going to be married with them until the actual exit, which could be 7, 8, 9 years from that point in time. And the whole idea is essentially, how do you help them? How do you handhold them in that journey to increase the odds, to increase the likelihoods of their as well as your success.
Who handheld you changing from corporate to a partnership, I would say smaller partnership company? What was what happened with approach to the business, approach to the opportunities, and basically it was a new industry for you. It is digital still, like, but same but different.
Yeah. I mean, it's as you can imagine, it's slightly different when you move from a 140,000 people company to a 14-person company. What is that? The 10,000 order of magnitude, exactly. Yeah. Things changed quite a bit. I think a lot of them for the better. I mean, one of the reasons why it changed, I really wanted to test the waters a little bit in an environment where I could have more impact, right? And where there is a lesser number of people who are doing more things in a more diversified way. If you're working for a large corporate, then what you do essentially ends up being rather niche, because there are a lot of people specializing in a lot of different areas. Whereas if you work for a much smaller company, then you need to be wearing multiple hats, right? And exactly, and that diversity kind of appealed to me. So I thought I'd test the waters. And again, it came with some good expectations, surprises, and some that were quite challenging as well.
Of course, but I think as we discussed before, and as we discussed often, you learned about a new world there are startups. And as you mentioned very quickly, but I want to dig deeper on that. The things change. The VC fund where you were involved was Series A and Series B, or later.
That's right.
Later.
Growth stage, yes.
Yeah, growth stage. As you said, quickly, and I want to dig deeper. What changes for startup when they get the Series E funding, or even before they get a Series E funding? Between the seed and Series E, there is a serious change in approach of business. So when we all start startups, and we all have started some startups at any point in our life, we hustle, we rethink, we pivot, we change. And then I think that maybe 90%, maybe less a bit, of startups have an idea about seed startup. Nobody sees are just around the corner, which is a Series A. What is the difference? We talk a lot with our guests here about getting up to seed, how prepare to start up, and most of the topics are on that side. But what happens when you get a seed and run towards, or have a runaway towards Series A? What happens then?
Yeah, so I think maybe a way to differentiate would be a kind of a growth stage, to not even call them startups anymore, right? I think maybe a better way to describe what they're trying to do is actually scale-ups, because if you think about seed and startups, it's all about how do you go from 0 to 1, right? And scale-up is really, once you have reached 1, how do you go from 1 to 10? And the dynamics are very, very different. So the scale-ups that we work with at STV, just to give you an idea of the range and the scale of them, typically would be the ones that are already kind of post-revenue. Typically would be the ones that would have between 30 and 150 people already, multiple offices. So you need to manage a lot of things in terms of how do you manage people, bureaucracy, processes, administration, and all that. And you really are once you have kind of proven that kind of product market fit, you're really trying to prove that your product is not only a super niche product appealing to just the very, very early adopters, but it's a product that really has a potential to appeal to a larger number, or kind of to a larger customer base.
Yeah, you mentioned that when somebody's seeking for a seed investment, everything comes down to total accessible market, TAM, and
team.
Yeah. And team, TAM and team.
Exactly. I've picked up this framework which I like, which I think is relevant to startups and scale-ups alike, except that at the different stages of the growth of the company, kind of different weighting needs to be applied to it, and it's the 4T framework. And the 4 T's basically stand for team, self-explanatory. TAM, or total addressable market, it could be a variation of it, like a serviceable addressable market or total serviceable market, but essentially how big your market is or could potentially be. These two are the most important at the very early stage, right? Because you don't have much else other than the idea in the market you're kind of trying to tackle. Now, as you grow, two other T's kind of come into play, and they could become more and more important the farther out you go. And these two other T's are technology, because in the startup scale-up VC world, we are looking for technology-enabled companies in order to accommodate for that kind of exponential growth. So technology needs to be there. The technology needs to enable you to scale. Technology should be somewhat proprietary, somewhat differentiated. It should provide a moat to against your competitors. So technology is a big part of it as well. And then finally, traction. Right? Because again, we are not talking about a team of 3 to 5 people with a PowerPoint. We are talking about a serious enterprise that already has a product out there in the market. So it's important to understand how important that product is in their respective customers' lives. How many people are there that are willing to pay for it? How many people are there who are willing to stick with it? What is the churn? How often do they, come and leave? How much does it require you in order to actually acquire such a customer, right? Whether you're a B2C company, you're doing a lot of digital marketing, or if you're a B2B company and you have large business development teams, there is a cost associated with it. Are you actually able to earn more money from your prospective customers, from your current customers, than it actually costs you to acquire them? So when you're a scale-up, you go through a very different kind of due diligence, which actually requires a much more quantitative input and kind of Excel analysis, as opposed to dreaming and kind of thinking about the big picture. Exactly.
Welcome to the real world. I remember once we spoke about one of my ventures, you asked me one question that stick to my mind even now, and I think it was like 6 months or even more before, like almost a year, when you told me what is the ratio between product and a service. Mm-hmm. And this is technology, the third T that you mentioned. How startups realize, can they scale or not? Are they dreaming a bit like, oh, we can scale, but then do you have a lot of service part in it? What is the ratio that maybe startups should have between service and tech? Is it 90-10 or?
Yeah, I don't think there's a secret number, right? The whole idea of that conversation was essentially the product driven by technology scales, right? Whereas the services, which are typically contingent on the people delivering the service, it's much more difficult to scale. Not completely impossible, but much more difficult, right? If you think about a company like Google, the reason why they're scaled, the reason why they're present in like all corners of the globe is because the technology is available to pretty much every single person with an internet connection on the globe, right? Without there necessarily being a Google person in their kind of neck of the woods. I mean, you and I are from Serbia, right? And Google doesn't have physical presence in Serbia. Still, it's one of the most used products in the digital space in Serbia. And that's the power of technology. How do you enable a product to be accessible to a customer without necessarily having a person to support them?
Oh, that's scalability. But how agile and how flexible can startups remain after this big change and coming scale up? Sorry, the question is basically how agile scale-ups can be.
So that's this interesting question, right? Where you are trying to retain that agility, because if you think about taking kind of 2 steps back, right? Why are startups successful? Startups are successful in disrupting kind of the entrenched kind of incumbents because of that agility, right? That's their secret sauce. Yeah, they typically don't have the funding. They typically don't have the know-how. They typically don't have the market share or anything like that, right? And the only thing, one of the few things that they have is this agility, right? The ability to actually act with speed, right? To try new things out and so on and so forth. So the question is, as you are kind of transitioning from being a startup, let's say typically defined as 3, 4, 5, 10 people sitting kind of in the same room or same apartment somewhere and just kind of coding away day and night. How do you transform from that into a scale up, which is typically more like 150 to 200 people, right? And kind of start to establish the kernels of the processes that enable you to scale even further, right? Because the idea, again, I'll go back to my previous employer, Google. They started as 2 people in a dorm room at Stanford, and today there are 150,000 people. But the secret sauce of their success and how they scaled is still somewhere in some of those initial conversations that these guys have had from the get-go, right? And how do you retain that as you grow to a 150,000 people organization is a very interesting question.
I read a book, Measure What Matters. And this was my, and I called you that time,
Yes.
you know, this was my eye-opener for OKRs.
Yes.
And this is something that was introduced by John Doerr to
Larry and Sergey.
Your friends, yeah.
Yes.
And they were like, "Oh, we are sold. Yeah, that's it. This is what we need to do." And even now, as a Googler for many years, they stick to that OKRs. So that's objectives and key results approach to the management. Do you think that of course, I don't have to ask you. It's proven to be a good code for success, but can anybody apply that, or is there, because this was your role, I would say, in your fund, VC fund.
That's right.
To implement serious management and stuff, to change stuff and processes in the VC, in the startups.
That's right, and that was actually one of the more important tools. And I think, you know, the beauty of that tool is it's not it's almost like a toolbox instead of a single tool, because it doesn't do one single thing, right? You could think of it kind of from the very first go. You could think of it as, well, you know, we kind of set up objectives and we measure the key results and we use it for performance management. We make sure that people are performing, right? But it's about much more than that. One of the key things that OKRs actually do is actually the alignment as well, right? Because the way that the OKRs are set, they're set throughout the organization, and the organization itself at the very top level has their own objectives and key results, right? So when you think about, and these kind of trickle down all the way to a single individual contributor. So the idea is that the objectives and key results of an individual flow into the company objective and key results, and the other way around. So at any given point in time, you understand how what you do contributes to the grander well-being of the company, right? So which kind of gives people the feeling of impact that they're having, even when they're working at a 140,000 people company, right? So that's number one. Number two, where it's really important, and this was also important for us when we were trying to apply this to some of our scale-ups, it actually ensures alignment as well, right? I put my OKRs, you work in a completely different function. Let's say I'm in sales and you're in product. We need to be working hand in hand in some way, shape, or form, but, you know, life gets in the way. I go to my clients, you go to your computer and kind of, you know, you try to build product, and we don't necessarily always communicate very well and very efficiently, right?
There is always a clash between production and sales.
And as the company grows, you enter a stage where, you know, there is a threat of people just kind of pulling in different directions, right? And we spoke about agility. You cannot be agile if people are pulling in very different directions. OKRs come in, so when OKRs are being set, we need to make sure that my OKRs are aligned with your OKRs. If I, as a salesperson, have a need and I need you to do something, I make sure that it's in your OKRs and vice versa. And then all of it kind of flows into the grander company OKR, so we make sure there is this alignment. So yes, you use it as kind of a performance management tool, but you also use it as a tool to align people, to kind of retain that agility. And then you also use it in order to give people kind of a sense of belonging, a sense of being kind of part of the grander vision, and giving them an opportunity to kind of feel that they're having impact, even if they're working at a large organization.
That's something that I think everybody needs, because I think the key word here is the transparency. Mm-hmm. So as you said, everybody can see each other's. So one question, I don't know whether if you can answer that question, but one question is, how hard was practically to implement OKRs to the organization? Being an entrepreneur for years now, and I know every change in the company, it's a struggle, it's a fight, it's you know. So Google, we all see it as the from outside as really the biggest company in the world, and definitely, as you said, scalable and whatnot, exponential organization. But how hard is in Google to implement something that Google not invented but promoted most heavily?
Listen, even at Google, it wasn't easy, right? And I think Google had the benefit of actually.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. I'm not alone. Entrepreneurs are not alone.
And Google had a benefit of growing up with it, right? So when I was there, it was kind of part of the institution, part of DNA. And Google, even though they did not invent it, they were kind of famous for it as kind of being the most prominent promoters of it. But even then, at OKRs you do on a quarterly basis, every quarter when you're kind of setting the OKRs, it's a struggle, right? And the reason why it's a struggle and why it's a challenge is because what OKRs again are trying to do, they're trying to align people. They're trying to let them kind of pull in the same direction.
And people are people.
And people are people, exactly, right? People. So as they're aligning, it's a bit of a messy process, right? You end up the process in a good position whereby everyone agrees on which direction you want to go into. But getting to that stage is not easy. And so we've tried to do that also with some of our portfolio companies. So we're trying to scale those best practices. And I'll tell you that even though there is a lot of work being done on OKRs as being very effective and very efficient and one of the best tools to align the organization, and scale-ups do need that. And we'll talk a little bit probably more about that, what some of the key challenges are. If you don't have that in your institutional DNA, it's hard. There are a lot of pushbacks, people not understanding what they need to do because it requires, and why they need to do it, right? Because it requires that kind of element of change, as you said, and change is hard.
There is always a thing that Simon Sinek is saying that start with why. This is his book and everything, and I was fool to think, wow, but I will record a video for my employees as we are a video production company. Yes. I'll record a video, I'll explain everything there, and that's it. And then I found a a TED Talk it's not a TED Talk, but it's a presentation of Simon Sinek, and where he says, you cannot just film a video and play it to the employees, you have to start with why. So even when you start with why, even when you explain everything, even when you have the experience from Google, it was hard to change the essence of the startup to bring them to scale up, to bring some structure in that. So probably your VC fund invested because they are not structured, whatever, and they saw the opportunity. If we structure it well, it can go exponentially. So what are the key changes that happens between startup and scale up?
So one of the things that we worked on when I joined was to kind of establish this value creation platform. Right? And the idea was essentially, let's identify what the key challenges of the scale-ups are, and let's kind of double down on how we help them address those challenges, right? So we've done a lot of benchmarking to see how it's being done in other parts of the world. We've done a lot of baselining, so we've spoken to pretty much every single portfolio company, not only of the fund that I was with, but also in the general market. And we came up with like 3 broad categories that are kind of the categories of problems and the challenges that every scale-up kind of faces. The very first one is talent. Right? It doesn't come as a surprise because you start like 3, 4, 5 people who are typically friends, know each other from before, have a relationship. It's relatively easy to find another person, right, who's kind of a high quality, aligns with the culture, driven, and so on and so forth. When you do a scale up, you need to grow that 5 to 100 and then to 500 and then to 1,000, right? So you're talking about a very different order of magnitude, right? And that's already one of the key challenges. And I think even more so here in this region, because we do have a scarcity of talent, finding the right talent in the quantities, i.e. the numbers that you need them, is incredibly hard, right? So that's the first part. The second part, what we found, and again, this doesn't necessarily come as a surprise, and for me, it was almost kind of shifting sides a little bit, especially when it comes to B2C companies, right? So companies that are producing a product that kind of appeals to a consumer as opposed to selling to another business. One of the key things, one of the key success factors is growth, right? Are you able to acquire customers? Are you able to build market share in an efficient way? Anyone can build market share if they can kind of deploy unlimited amounts of capital. Capital, unfortunately, is not unlimited, right? So can you do it efficiently? It turns out, and again, it shouldn't come as a surprise, that some of the most effective as well as cost efficient, if done right, ways of acquiring customers are through digital and performance marketing, right?
It's interesting. Sorry to interrupt you, but they said that 43% of all money invested in startups go back to the. They said Google and Facebook, but generally the social media.
That's right, and that's exactly what I was coming at, right? So if you're a VC fund and you've invested $20 million in a company at whatever valuation, right, and you know that out of the 29 will go back to Google and Facebook, you want to get the biggest bang for the buck, right? It's not that Google and Facebook are bad. I mean, the reason why they're such large companies is because they're incredibly efficient, effective at what they do, but it's a tool. And you need to have somebody who's able to drive that tool, to drive that car, if you will, right, in the most effective and the most efficient way. So we spent quite a bit of time helping our startups kind of build that muscle, build that capability, right? How to grow, how to make sure not only that they have a good relationship with the performance marketing organizations such as Facebook and Google, but also to help them build their product in a way that kind of enables and helps customer acquisition. Your UX, UI, your mobile assets, your apps, how fast does it load, how easy is it to navigate, what is the kind of user journey and all of that, right? So that was kind of the second big the second big category. The third big category, and again, this is, I think, potential a little bit more, even more challenging here in the region than in some other places in the world. As you might know, this region is all about large organizations, right? If you look at the contribution to GDP, almost, depending on the country, but almost 80% of the GDP is generated either by government and government-owned entities, large family conglomerates, family offices, or multinational companies, right? So the SME share is rather small, 22, 25%.
What is that share in US? Maybe
it's the other way around. It's the other way around.
Other way around.
It's almost 80% of it is actually SME.
But
SMEs.
do you see the change? Sorry, remember what you wanted to say. But do you see the change in the recent years or a year of the government here and the officials towards that change? Yes, a lot of it's happening. We can probably talk about it when we talk about the VC, the VC industry here, because there is a significant government component in that, in driving the VC industry that then invests in obviously private enterprises and the startups / SMEs in order to kind of generate job growth and kind of diversify away from large corporates as well. But going back to the previous point, or the category number 3, if you're a startup, right? For you to be successful, especially if you're not in a B2C model, if you're in a B2B model, you need to have success with the 80% of the economy, right? Which is the government or the family offices and the multinationals. And again, it shouldn't come as a surprise. Dealing with these guys is incredibly difficult if you're just starting up right now. There is a lot of red tape, right? You go to one of these guys and they tell you, yeah, great. I mean, your platform is good. Give us, the last 5 years of your audited financial statements and we can get you through the procurement process. Except you don't have that if you're a startup, obviously, right? So it's a bit so it is a bit of a catch-22. And as a lot of us have been going through lately, like even opening a bank account here, if you do not have that financial history and scale, is incredibly difficult. The idea for this third category was basically, how do we help our startups / scale-ups? How do we give them this stamp of approval so that when they go to the government, when they go to a large family office, when they go to multinational, they look at them, they see that they have been funded by a large institutional investor, sophisticated financial institutional investor, and then they say, you know what, the risk of dealing with these guys is low. We will go and work with them without the 5 years of audited financial statements. So how do we help to introduce them to the right people? How do we help get them through the procurement process? How do we also help them kind of speak the lingo? I don't know how much you know about that, but if you're a startup and you want to work with one of those kind of big conglomerates, big corporates, it's a very different language even that is being spoken. I was there when you said it on GFS, GITEX Future Stars, when you were on a stage panel, listening to a friend of mine, and taking notes. And then you said, startups have to learn the language of VCs and the language of large corporates, in order to understand, as you said, 5 years audited, finances. That's something that it's not usually not feasible. But I see the way you are talking about all of these things. I see your excitement, and I see that your next direction. You're still there for some board as a board member in the few startups that you were with the STV. But your next step is another change, and by your excitement and the passion you're talking about it, I see that it's in. Are you staying in the same area, in same direction, or same let's say industry, or? What is the change?
Yeah, so I've recently moved on from STV, the fund that I was with, and I've set up my own advisory firm. So funny enough,
we will link below the link to
right.
The website. Yeah.
So I went from 140,000 people organization to a 14 people organization to a 1.4 person organization. Right. I don't have a dog yet, but my wife helps a little bit, so maybe that's helpful. So it's kind of it's a move and a change kind of from a corporate entity point of view, but in a lot of ways, in my mind, it's kind of a continuation of what I've been doing for the last 15 and 20 years, because the themes and topics and the kind of work even that I do doesn't fundamentally change. I'm still incredibly excited about technology and the impact that technology has on changing the world, enabling that change, empowering people. So I will stay in this kind of high-tech space. I'm still incredibly excited about working with entrepreneurs, with people who are, harvesting or harnessing that technology in order to enact that change, and trying to help them with my experience, my network, the advice, and everything that I possibly can in order to increase the likelihood of their success.
Who can approach you? Of course everybody can approach you, but for doing business, what is there has to be some niche of interest that is for your Jakov advertising. Advisory, yeah. Yes. Jakov advisory.
Yes.
What is the niche of what is your who can approach you for some consultancy and driving the
So right now I'm working with a range of different organizations, and some of them they range.
Some of them are the biggest in the region.
So they range from literally like a 2-person startup that I took on because I really like the vision and what they're trying to do, the general energy. I kind of feed myself on the passion of the people, and I feel like I can help them and provide with and to achieve that impact. But also on the other hand, I also work with some pretty large organizations, some of them being some of the largest sovereign wealth funds that we have here in the region. And again, the size and the scale of the organization that I work with may be different, but the impact and the passion and the share of technology, the potential that technology has in order to kind of achieve that impact is something that they have in common. So different people, different organizations, different challenges, but I think the same amount of passion and excitement that I have in working with them. So this is kind of a common theme. I don't have a specific industry that I work with. I don't even have a specific region that I work with. I actually work with a couple of people from the US, from the Silicon Valley. There are a couple of others in other emerging markets. For me, the vision needs to the mission really needs to resonate with me. The challenge needs to resonate with me. And then obviously there needs to be, as when you're working with people, you kind of need to click, right? Because you're going to become a part of their extended team. So it needs to be a pleasure and exciting as rather than a chore.
Yeah, I remember a few years back, the Apple did one a big change. Their full design team went out from the company, organizing a new venture, new company, but still working for Apple, the same things that they were doing. So this situation with you and the VC funds and the all connections and all the things that you were doing in the past 15 years, basically, is that you're doing the same thing, but now. You I don't know, I really like the way you talk about the opportunities and about things, but it seems when you say it like that, like it seems, we only need to do this and that. It's hard work, it's persistent work, it's on day-to-day basis, and it's something that startups or scale-ups need to learn. So my question is, how important is in this process, of course, learning, getting to know new things and so on, but how important is being able to change all the time?
I mean, you need to keep changing, right? I think change is the only constant. I think it was the tagline of your previous. Yes.
I should put it here.
Exactly, but and again, that this may sound a little bit too high level, too philosophical, but the change is accelerating even, right? And if you're not kind of keeping up or trying to keep up with it, you get left behind, right? So you do need to acquire new skills. You need to keep learning. You need to keep extending your relationship. You need to keep kind of trying to kind of work ahead of the change almost in order to be there. In order to be there, kind of when the change happens, and kind of capture that opportunity. I'll give a very specific example, right? I mean, one of the kind of hot words or hot acronyms these days is NFTs. Right, the non-fungible tokens, and it literally, I mean, it's been around for almost a decade, but it literally exploded over the last, I think, 2 or 3 months or what have you.
Literally.
Right, literally over the last 2 or 3 months, and I had zero understanding or knowledge of what it was, but the last month I've been working with a team in the Silicon Valley that is putting up a platform that uses NFTs to empower creators and athletes. A very interesting business model that uses what is super latest technology, if you will, in order to achieve certain certain objectives. So in order to do that, in order to be helpful, I really needed to brush up on what the NFTs were in the first place, right? And
do you work with NFT startups? Yeah, of course. What are NFTs?
Exactly?
And then your previous company, Google, jumps to moment.
Exactly.
This podcast is named The Change Officer, and I think you really earned your title, The Change Officer. So you can put it in LinkedIn, definitely, among all the things that you've done in your life. But also we have this part which is called media, the Change Officer Media, because my friend Vuk works with the digital and innovation companies, and we were more into his yard of this topic. But let's turn a little bit to the media and how media is changing in the region, but not only in the region, but globally, as we are witnessing. Amazing amount of watched hours of OTTs like Netflix, like Hulu and stuff. And then not to mention YouTube or Facebook or TikTok or Instagram and so on. So where we are with media and specifically video, and I think you still sit on the board of one of the biggest media companies in the region. Telfaz 11. And can you tell us, maybe their journey is a good example. They started on YouTube. They started or they just gathered a few talents that were making some skits and some short videos. But now they made a deal with Netflix, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, that's actually their second deal with Netflix. Yeah,
a second deal with Netflix. So. What is the change? What is the media direction? In which direction media is going?
Yes, in general, kind of from a very high level, right? And Corona. Funny enough, we've been talking for a while. We haven't mentioned Corona once, which I think is it's kind of refreshing actually, because everyone keeps talking about Corona. But it did have fundamental changes, obviously, on a lot of industries and on the way we work, but also on a lot of kind of digitally enabled industries. And we can talk about media. Media is definitely one of those, right? We have all been, kind of around the world, we have all been kind of locked into all sorts of different curfews. The watch times have gone through the roof. Even before that, they were kind of on an upwards curve, right? But with the lockdowns and everything, we found, especially a lot of these OTTs, like the usage actually went through the roof, right? Netflix is the prime example, but not the only example. You have the success of Amazon Prime. You also have Disney Plus, which just came relatively recently, acquired huge huge viewership, and so on and so forth. So that I think is the first element. So the actual viewers numbers have gone through the roof, beyond anyone's expectations, to some extent also facilitated by the pandemic. The second thing, I think also, again, they're correlated. Because of that, more and more money is being invested in creating the media, right? Because you have streaming platforms, right? And then these kind of streaming platforms, I mean, are in some way, shape, or form at war for the eyeballs, right? Because at the end of the day, you can only be watching one at any given point in time. And so the way that they differentiate themselves is through content. Right? They want to attract you because they have proprietary content you cannot find anywhere else, right? So content is a premium, content is not a commodity, right? So you're seeing more and more of these guys kind of going into the content production. And, Netflix started very small, obviously. Last year, they've invested $11.2 billion in original content. This year, they've announced 17.4. Right? So an extra $6 billion in original content production. The whole idea being is that the only way for you to to retain you is to provide you with something you cannot find anywhere else, right? So I think that this is another kind of big trend and a big theme. Now, kind of adjacent to that is when you think about the types of content that people are watching, what the availability of global streaming content allows you to do, it allows you to kind of target this long tail, right? It used to be, focus used to be more kind of on kind of the global average. So let's go with a Hollywood Marvel production that kind of appeals to the lowest common denominator, if you will, almost, right? But with streaming platforms, what you're able to do, because your distribution is almost comes for free, you're able to target all sorts of niches. And because you have global access, one of the key things is how do you become locally relevant? Right?
And this is through localization.
Globalization through localization, right? So if you as Netflix or if you as Amazon Prime or any one of the competing streaming platforms that we also have in this region want to be relevant, want to be differentiated, want to be locally relevant, then you really need to be doubling down on local content. Right? Again, Disney Plus is great because they have Star Wars and a bunch of other things. But if you want to be locally relevant, you need to have stuff that is relevant to a user in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, in any one of the countries in the Gulf, and so on and so forth. And so Telfaz, going back to them, is one of the only big premium providers of relevant local content here in the region, right? As you said, they started off as YouTubers, and again, these guys are kind of coming from Saudi, and when they started on YouTube, there was no other venue where they could have kind of produced the content for, because the big streamers were not interested. We haven't gotten to the localization element just yet, and in Saudi Arabia, you couldn't even put it into the movie theaters because there were none to begin with, right? So it was kind of a blank space, like super nascent. So these guys, when the opportunity presented itself, the movie theaters came to Saudi Arabia, streamers came super interested for local contents. These guys were basically the best positioned to produce that local content. So they started with a series of short films called 6 Windows into the Desert, and they have basically signed this first deal with Netflix, whereby their content was featured on the Netflix platform. Netflix, one of the things that they do, they are very, very good at measuring engagement, right? And they measure the engagement on this. They found a significant audience hungry for this type of content, which is why they came back to Telfaz, and recently they signed another deal for 4 feature films, 4 Netflix originals, to be produced over the period of the next 4 to 5 years. To be streamed on Netflix.
I can just imagine the rate of change that has to happen in the company, which produce skits or short films. Now 4 feature films. That's like how they are taking it. I would say that they're quite agile, up to the moment company, how they're taking it. What was your maybe biggest challenge?
So extremely agile, right? Like from perspective of kind of shifting towards towards kind of premium content. As you said, it's not the same to produce like a 10-minute YouTube skit versus kind of a Netflix ready kind of full feature film, right? But I think the creativity behind is still the same. One of the biggest value proposition, one of the biggest differentiators that they have is Telfaz, if I may say so, obviously I'm biased, I think you have by far the strongest creative team of anyone in the region, and the team that really, really understands the local culture, right? And they actually started as kind of the comedians, right? Like people who produce comedy, and comedy is notoriously difficult to get right? Because there are a lot of kind of cultural associations with it. It's very, very localized.
I'm trying for 25 years now
Right,
in media.
right, and these guys were able to do that, right? So kind of transitioning that creativity, that kind of core skill into a different type of production, but still driven by this creativity, which is kind of their secret sauce, I think is how they've been able to do that. But in order to do that, as you said, kind of, especially kind of from a production point of view, we're definitely talking about scaling up. We're definitely talking about building different production capabilities, how you shoot, how you record, how you screenwrite, and all of that. And I think, the guys are doing a great job in getting there.
Yeah, I think that the conclusion for this media part is, of course, content is king, and it will ever be that the platforms will change, the way of consumption will change, but the content is king, and then storytelling is queen. Or in that content, of course, storytelling. And so they were able to do 10-minute skits, but maybe things change now with this feature films. So I don't know whether if you are, do you know what happened with U-Turn?
They got acquired by Webedia, if I'm not mistaken. Webedia, yeah.
Uh-huh. And that's it. Like they're not what they're doing, because I know the last time I heard about them, they went to OSN and with some content for OSN and so on. You're not in.
Yeah, so don't quote me on that. I think they were acquired by a larger corporate entity called Webedia Arabia, and from my understanding, I think they're still producing content.
Yeah.
But in a
but
slightly
Telfaz was much smaller. When I came here 2013, Telfaz was just starting, and they were much smaller. But you could sense. U-Turn was always kind of a corporate thing. That was my perception, like of them. But Telfaz was the one to really have this relevant content, and now on the long run it pays off. Ivan, I could ask you 20 more questions, but I think we are running out of film on the cameras. I really would like to thank you as a friend and as a expert in your field. I see your passion. I see that, and I'm sure that we have to hang out more and talk more about those things. I really learned a lot during this conversation. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for the invite, and maybe we can do another one in 2023.
Yeah, 2 years. Oh, this is how excited you were. You don't want to come before that. No. Thank you very much, and of course, let's sign up now for the third episode in 2 years.
Looking forward to it.